Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Ashie Bhandiwad, founder and CEO of StemChef. And it's absolutely fantastic being here. I have been having a very wonderful time and listening to so many inspiring talks. I hope you all have been enjoying as well. So, before I really get started, and if the slides would have shown, would have given the talk away, which was the new face of education. Before I dive into specifically that topic, I wanted to kind of dive into the old face of education, sort of where the educational roots came from into the system. And it's all thanks to the system that came about in the late 18th century, and it was built specifically for the growing industrial era. So it was modeled on the requirements of industrialization, and it was literally structured after it. So having an essential factory line of workers, if you will, that would more or less have the same basic skill set in communication and mathematics in order to actually have some skilled labor for feeding into the industrial era or the age. What it did not embrace or inspire was personalized thinking or creative thinking from individuals. It had just one goal. So now, bearing that in mind, let's shift into the current century. Very much the theme of this conference, technology. None of the deep-rooted mechanisms of the system really provide the necessary skill sets to succeed in today's workforce. And the disruption of this a couple century old very, very deep-rooted system has been a long time coming. And the current situation that we're in it's really going to accelerate that disruption. So what can we as individuals do about it? Well, my entrepreneurial path actually began because I asked this very question about 4 odd years ago. That was way before the startup that I have now founded officially started. In my previous life, as I'd like to describe it, I was a bioenergy scientist, absolutely not had an inkling of anything to do with academia or the education system. I was in academia, but not the current system that we're ingrained in so deeply. It was just coupled to the fact that my 3-year-old daughter was wanting to learn about everything, not yet in the formal system. So changing the face of education really became personal for me. And I'm going to talk about how I'm doing that exactly pertaining to what I do towards the end of the talk. But today, right in the next 15 minutes or so that we have, I will be talking about 3 tangible outlooks that I'd like to equip you with toward that goal. So, first of all, let's acknowledge the situation that we're in. The pre-COVID situation, if you will, like the life as we knew it, everybody had a very good compartmentalized planned schedule. There was sanity, demarcation into your day, into your life. And that all of that sort of just flew out the window since shelter in place, and I know it's being lifted, but for the past 2 months, literally globally, life has completely changed. This home schedule and the work schedule and your children's schedule, family schedule, everything is just one tangled mess. And for the most part, many of the parts of the world have summer vacations, so that just adds to the chaos of not having the proper structure or enrichment to provide to them. But among all of this, there has been one constant, and that is actually going to be a constant beyond anything, beyond the crisis that we're in, but beyond the pandemic, even after everything, as we know, changes. And those, rather than one, there's like multiple, there are meal times, your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, snacks in between, maybe. That is something that is constant anywhere and everywhere. And that is exactly what you can leverage to introduce bite-sized forms of tangible learning moments. And that can be tethered to a more holistic education. So if the slides are up and running, I would show you what education looks like to me. And that essentially was a collage of kids eating and having fun, families cooking, like a whole spread of table with a feast. And essentially, you would not think about education as a word or a describing factor on what you would see. You would call it family time or joyous or, fun times to connect. And why am I saying this? Why am I such a big proponent of food and anything in the kitchen or eating and connecting that to teaching or education? Because I started realizing the gravity of this concept since my daughter was about 3 years old. And honestly, to this day, it doesn't cease to amaze me how amazingly powerful this strategy is. I have engaged with over 3,000 children over the past couple of years. And it really works. So there are three keys that encompass this philosophy. So the name of my company I didn't mention in the beginning is StemChef. So essentially science, technology, engineering, mathematics. But specifically, in a more packaged way, it's science. And I call it science through cooking. So this philosophy that I like to drive home today, excuse me, really highlights three keys. The first one is creative thinking. Now, the very unfortunate thing is that we compartmentalize everything for ourselves, for everybody, for children, for everyone. And, lessons and extra lessons and maybe extracurriculars, and same thing for us. And even those get further compartmentalized. So the confined structure doesn't really allow for the creative melding of the ideas. And that is so crucial for education, for learning, the ability to think creatively, or out of the box thinking, as it's so popularly known as, is extremely vital. So much so that a couple decades ago, I believe, NASA had asked a scientist named George Land to create a creativity test to find the most divergent thinkers so that they could put them on a team to solve really, really hard problems. Again, if my slides were working, I have this little TED clip to show you. Go ahead and watch that TED Talk. It is really very interesting. But what the video was going to show you was this creativity test. They tested, and it was fantastic. The results were marvelous. They found really divergent thinkers and creative thinkers, and NASA was very happy. So they wanted to take it a step further, and they wanted to see whether creativity is sort of inculcated over time, or if you're born sort of genius thinkers or creative thinkers. So they levied this test on, I don't really have the exact number, but thousands of kindergartners, 5-year-olds, or pre-kindergartners. So who have not had any formal education. And go ahead and put it in the chat box, if you will. Try to guess the number or the percentage of creative thinkers that came out of that test from, let's say, 1,000 children, 1,000 or 1,500 children. I'll just give you like 10 seconds. Okay, I don't see anyone taking a stab, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you it was 98%. They had 98% children who were deemed creative and genius thinkers. That was a fascinating number. So they wanted to continue that test. They tested the same children after about, I want to say 5 years. So they were around about in the age range of 10 years old. So they went ahead and tested them again, and the percentage dropped significantly to high 20s. So I think it was somewhere in the range of 20 to 25%. They did that again, and when they were teenagers, they dropped again to just about teen numbers. And they did that. I don't believe they continued the test because everybody was very depressed as how declining the percentage was. So they did do a testing for a whole large crowd of adults, I believe 25 and over or 20 and over, and the number was abysmal. It was 2%. So the point I'm really trying to drive home with that is that we're all born creative thinkers, but we lose it over time. And that's because we do not use it, sort of like use it or lose it situation. But you need to couple creative thinking with something else, and that is cognizant thinking, because you need to be able to make unintuitive connections to actually learn something and make something out of it. Also, sort of apply that knowledge in different situations. And that is the secret sauce to actually get a viable education, not grades, but the real education. So if you try to be cognizant, you'll find instances of teachable moments pop up all the time. Let me give you an example. A while back, a friend of my daughter came over for a play date, and both of them wanted to bake a pie, so we did that. My daughter's friend decided that she wanted to make a little smiley face. So she wanted to make a smiley face with chocolate chips. So that's what she did. But unfortunately, the chips sank to the bottom, and she was unhappy. She was kind of on the verge of crying. My daughter, as I mentioned before, we'd been doing this since she was 3, and this happened a couple of years ago. She's 8 now, so about 6.5 years old. Jumped in and immediately said, "Oh, that's density. Don't worry about it. That's what's supposed to happen. Maybe we can try it again." So we went ahead and prepared another pie, and the two of them had fun trying different little items to put to see what sank and what floated. She went away thrilled because something just completely resonated and clicked with her. And that was sort of a learning moment that kind of it just started a whole chain of more curiosity and curious learning for her, because her mother a week later told me that she used the same principle when her mom was making salad dressing with oil and vinegar and called it out right away, being the denser, the vinegar being the denser. So I'm going to take a moment to replay that situation. And maybe some of you might be thinking, you're baking a pie, you're doing the chocolate chips, all of that happens, your child starts crying, weeping. That's not what occurs to you. It's definitely not what's going to resonate with you to explain to your child, which is perfectly fine. All you have to do is just be cognizant of the situation. So the chocolate chips sank and your child is unhappy. You don't know why. All you do is go to the internet, Google it, find why, and you'll get the answer. In fact, that makes for even stronger connection, because the retention of knowledge is going to be for both of you together, or the multiple parties involved in teaching or self-learning rather than being pedagogical. So this brings me to my second key, which is embracing failure. That is such an important thing. We penalize ourselves, and kids get penalized. Everyone gets penalized for mistakes all the time, every day. But when you cook in the kitchen or when you're doing something with food, those aren't disasters that sort of dent your life or scar you forever. And cooking, or the very least eating, is something we do all the time, every day. And there's literally inspiration that you can find in small or big mistakes. In fact, epic kitchen disasters are gold mines for lessons that you can learn. And they don't have to be of monstrous, inedible magnitude. Even tiny little mistakes, which are not even failures, can actually help understand and just serve as a little tether to learn more and increase the spectrum of knowledge. So let me give you an example. I do workshops quite often, and I was holding one with several children, and there was one particular recipe that a set of children were doing, and it was puff pastry. It was a team of 3 or 4 kids, and they followed the recipe to the T, except for one tiny deviation. Again, it's not really a mistake. It was just a deviation. They did not follow the recipe exactly with that specific process or the step. The step called for crumbling butter, not crumbling butter in the puff pastry, layering it. And they followed everything else. And unfortunately, that little deviation did not result in the perfect puff pastry. However, it was certainly not a disaster. It came out to be a very beautiful pie crust. And in the end, they learned a lifelong lesson in chemistry and thermodynamics. In fact, that also led me to discovering a foolproof recipe for puff pastry. So it isn't something that you can you can penalize yourself. It's something that you can actually use very, very happily to as a playing field to make mistakes and learn in the process. That brings me to the third and most important key, which is positive reinforcement. So many multiple studies have shown that when there is positive reinforcement, the learning in general increases not only the retention, but also the transfer of knowledge. So it sort of just sets on a cyclical reaction and pulling more people into it. Food intrinsically serves as a positive reinforcement. So if you think about food as your final product, that result not only is extremely gratifying, but it can be realized with so many senses. You literally have a happy emotion triggered with it. Studies have shown that emotional connections are so powerful. They are vital for active learning and cognitive processes like perception and analysis, retention, attention. So it is something that is extremely powerful. And since I cannot show you this clip, I want to call attention to this movie Ratatouille. It's Disney's, I believe, or Pixar's movie Ratatouille. It's a little rat who's a chef. There's this particular clip in which the food critic, comes to the restaurant to try the signature dish. And the rat serves him the ratatouille. And the emotion that is captured is so phenomenal. He takes one bite and it shoots him to the past, kind of remembering his childhood and the taste and the scene and everything created by his mother. So now just take a moment and think about if there was a little tiny academic lesson associated with it. So, for example, osmosis, which is essentially what happens. If you salt vegetables, it draws out the moisture and it deepens the flavor. That is that is essentially the little scientific fact beyond why you do what you do for the recipe. That would have been a lifelong lesson that would be learned. So all I'm saying is that there's such a strong connection between um, food and retention, and it's sort of encased in of a feeling and emotion that it can stand the test of time. Now, I this is going to be very, very difficult without the slides, but let me see if I can do it. We were going to shift gears to organic chemistry. So organic chemistry gets a super bad rep, and I wanted to sweeten the deal a little bit. So on the slide, you would have seen a equation, an incomplete equation. And that equation was a reaction between a generic aldol and an amine. That was a question mark. So it really is detracting from how it would have shown up. But aldol is nothing but a sugar, and an amine is a building block of protein. This is sort of high school chemistry that generally is learned, I suspect, all over the world, give or take. It's not the most common reaction, but I feel, I mean, if I put myself in the shoes of me as a high schooler years ago, I was really put off by the equations in general happening in organic chemistry. And when I started diving into using food in education, I saw this equation in a completely new light. So anyway, long story short, this is something called a Maillard reaction. And it's just a whole bunch of C's and H's and O's, as usually you'll find. But you can sort of wipe away the reactants and replace them with sort of like a hands-on experiment. So replace them with food ingredients. So aldols or ketosis, which was in the reaction, was just a form of sugar. So you take a cup of sugar. Amines are building blocks for proteins. Proteins is found in eggs. So you take an egg, and then you add a few more ingredients like flour and baking soda. And then you mix it all up together. And then the question was, what do you get? It was supposed to be Maillard reaction products, right? So that was the equation. But when the slide showed up, it looked really like it was a recipe. And that was exactly it. It was a recipe to a cookie. So the Maillard reaction products were nothing but the beautiful golden brown color and the wonderful aroma that you would get by the compounds by baking and having sugar and proteins mixed together, exposed to certain temperatures for a certain amount of time. So then you bite into a cookie and you think, that is organic chemistry. It's not so terrible after all. And the same thing applies to when you bite into a golden brown French fry, or like the perfect sear on your steak, perhaps. And that kind of just brings me to say, if you really throw the traditional book and pen and paper learning, well, not completely out the window, but just keep it at the side and use these three keys to sort of try to blend it into your everyday life, you can literally bring any kind of learning, any kind of education, any kind of tool to your dinner table for yourself to learn, and for children, and for anyone else who might be interested. So it kind of just sets you up on a lifelong path for education. So I mentioned early on in my talk that I will talk about what I specifically do at the end of the talk. And so this is what I have done. I have melded those three keys into creating an escape room that is designed specifically to teach science to kids through cooking. So, all in all, children have the self confidence and the ability to discover things on their own, and then they retain it with the positive reinforcement by making it into a recipe that they literally are engaging themselves with. Since the pandemic, I still do run a physical space. And since the pandemic, I had to sort of create an online rendition of it. And it's, it's, I just sort of helped to keep the enrichment and the education alive and different on a completely sort of a different angle um, among a lot of children. So that is what the new face of education looks like to me. It's through an escape room. So with that, I thank you so much for your attention. I apologize that the slides couldn't go up, and I would love to answer any questions if you might have. And feel free to reach out to me. I can be reached at hello@stemchef.com. That's my email. And you can follow me on the social channels. The name of the company again is StemChef. So I will see if you have any questions. I'll go ahead and type it in the chat box, and I will talk to the organizers and see